Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know those unassuming little devices we see all the time, flame detectors? Well, they're surprisingly complex.
Yeah, you don't really think about it much.
Right, they're just kind of there. But today, we're going deep on a concept that's way more interesting than it might seem at first glance, their field of view.
It's true.
And to guide our deep dive today, we'll be using safety guidelines from, let me see here. Yep, msasafety.com.
Good stuff.
So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. What exactly do we mean when we talk about a flame detector's field of view?
That's a great question. Because it's not like they have eyes,
Right.
but we can kind of think about it like that.
Okay, so like how much they can see.
Exactly. Imagine a cone of vision projecting outwards from the detector. That cone, that's its field of view, or FOV for short.
Got it. So it's not like a full 360 seeing everything around it. More like, I don't know, a spotlight.
Perfect analogy. You got it.
But then wouldn't you want the widest field of view possible? Like wider is always better, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Wider FOV, sees more stuff. Sounds good, right? But it's not that simple. A wider field of view doesn't always mean a longer detection range. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite.
Oh, really? Huh. Now that you mention it, that does kind of make sense.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, but you got to remember, it's all about the physics of light and how that detector is actually seeing that flame.
So it's like spreading the butter too thin. If the vision is too wide, it can't see as far.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot, the right balance between width and depth.
So it's a trade-off then.
It can be, which is why you can't just slap up any old detector and expect it to do the job. You got to factor in the layout of the space, any potential obstructions, what kind of fires you're worried about.
So placement is key.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets even trickier when you start thinking about the center axis. Think of that like the detector's laser focus.
Laser focus. All right, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, this is where it gets really important. That center axis is where the detector is most sensitive. Like in the source document we're looking at, it's called the on-center aim point, where it can detect even the tiniest flicker from the furthest away.
Okay, so we got our cone of vision, and then right down the middle we've got this superpower beam, the center axis.
Nailed it.
And that's why placement is so important. You want to make sure that center axis is pointing right where the fire is most likely to start, right?
Exactly.
So if that detector's off by even a little bit, it might not see the fire as quickly.
You got it. Think of it like this. It's like having a security guard, and they've got their eyes glued to the most vulnerable spot.
Oh, yeah, does that make sense?
Right. Like they're not going to be as quick to react if something happens outside of their direct line of sight.
Exactly. So we really do need to make sure those detectors are locked onto the right spot.
Absolutely. And that's where those diagrams we were looking at come in handy. Remember those 3D detection cones?
Oh, yeah. Those things, honestly, when I first saw those, I was like, whoa, this is a bit much.
Uh-huh. I know they can look a little intimidating at first glance,
Yeah, all those numbers and lines.
but they actually make a lot of sense once you know what you're looking at.
Okay, so walk me through it.
All right, so you've got the cone representing the detector's field of view, right?
Right.
Now, see how it's divided up into different zones with percentages like 100%, 75%, 50%?
Yeah, I see that.
Those percentages represent the detector's sensitivity at different points within its fields of view.
So the closer you are to the center, the more sensitive it is.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the 100% zone, that's the sweet spot.
Our center axis superpower beam.
You got it. That's where the detector is operating at peak performance, able to detect a fire from the furthest distance possible.
But as you move further away from that center axis out into those 75%, 50% zones, the sensitivity decreases.
That's right, which means it might not detect the fire as quickly.
Okay, so if a flame pops up right in the center, the detector is like, boom, fire.
Uh-huh.
But if it's way off to the side, it might be like, is that a fire? Better wait and see.
Which is obviously not what you want.
Not at all.
And that's why understanding those diagrams is so important, because they help you visualize how the detector is seeing the space and why precise placement is just so crucial.
It's like giving your detectors the best possible chance to do their job.
Exactly. But hold on to your hats, because it gets even more interesting when you start thinking about the type of fire you're dealing with.
Oh. How so?
Well, remember that FOV benchmark table we mentioned earlier?
The one with all those different fuel types?
That's the one.
Yeah, that one was a bit overwhelming, I'm not going to lie.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Lots of technical terms.
But it highlights a really important point. different fuels burn differently.
Oh, right, of course.
I mean, they have different flame temperatures, different colors, even the way they flicker can vary.
So a detector might be super quick to pick up on, say, a gasoline fire,
Right,
but slower to react to like a wood fire.
exactly. And that's why it's so important to choose the right type of flame detector for the job.
So there's even more to it than just the field of view.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of factors to consider.
Wow, this is way more complicated than I thought.
It can be, but that's why we're here, right? To break it all down.
That's right. All right, so we were talking about different types of flame detectors. So different detectors for different fuels makes sense, but how do you even choose the right one?
Well, it comes down to the specifics of the detector's design, how those sensors actually work.
Oh, okay. So like some detectors are better at seeing certain types of flames than others.
Exactly. Like some detectors are really good at picking up on those very specific wavelengths of light that are emitted by certain types of fires. It's kind of like how we see color.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, it's all about the electromagnetic spectrum. But that's probably a deep dive for another day.
Uh-huh. Yeah, let's not get too carried away.
But the point is, if you're designing a fire safety system, say, for a restaurant kitchen, you'd probably want a different type of detector than you would for, I don't know, a warehouse full of paper products.
Okay, that makes sense. You wouldn't want a detector going off every time someone fired up the grill.
Exactly. False alarms are no good. It's all about using the right tool for the job.
So this has been a real eye-opener. I never realized just how much goes into choosing and installing these things.
It's definitely more complex than it seems at first glance, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But hey, that's what these deep dives are all about.
That's right, uncovering the hidden complexities of everyday things.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway here is don't underestimate the importance of fire safety. It's easy to kind of take those little detectors for granted, but they really are our first line of defense against a potentially dangerous situation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So folks, make sure you've got those detectors installed, make sure they're the right type for your needs, and most importantly, if you're ever unsure about anything, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified professional.
Absolutely. Safety first, always.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, a big thank you to our expert for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to talk about fire safety.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.